I sat across from my son at the kitchen table where he'd eaten cereal every morning for 18 years, and I told him something I never imagined I'd have to say. I told him, no. That single word cracked something open between us, something I wasn't sure could ever be sealed back together. My name is Thomas Webb. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a firefighter in Portland, Oregon, and I retired with a pension, a paid-off house, and a savings account. I'd built one careful dollar at a time. I raised my son alone after his mother died. I coached his Little League team. I drove him to college, move-in day in my pickup truck with his mattress strapped to the roof. I thought I knew the man he'd become. I thought I'd done right by him. I was wrong about a few things. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. My son called me on a Thursday evening in February. He was 36 years old, working as a senior financial advisor at a firm in downtown Portland. He'd been married for 2 years to a woman named Claudia, whose family owned commercial real estate all across the Pacific Northwest. Old money, the kind of family that has a box at the Oregon Symphony and refers to their vacation home as the property on the island. I'd met her parents exactly 3 times. They were polite in the way that wealthy people are polite when they're deciding how much you matter. "Dad," he said when I picked up, "you have to come see it. We just signed the papers." I felt the warmth any father feels, that proud, reflexive joy. "See what?" I asked. "The house," he said. "Claudia found it 6 months ago, and we've been working on the offer ever since. It's in Lake Oswego. 5 bedrooms, 3 acres, a view of the water. Dad, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Lake Oswego." I knew what houses cost there. I'd driven through that neighborhood enough times to understand that the word house meant something different on those streets than it did anywhere else. "That's wonderful, son," I said, and I meant it. "When can I come by?" "Sunday," he said. "We're having a small gathering, just family and close friends." I showed up on Sunday with a bottle of wine and an open mind. The address took me down a winding road through pine trees and past mailboxes that stood farther apart the deeper in I went. When I finally pulled up to the house, I sat in my truck for a moment before getting out. It wasn't a house. It was an estate. Craftsman style, stone and cedar, with a circular driveway and a 3-car garage and a covered porch that stretched the full length of the front. The kind of place that appears in home design magazines next to words like timeless and legacy property. The kind of place that costs real money. My daughter-in-law answered the door before I even knocked. She was wearing a cream blazer over dark jeans, her hair done like she was attending a luncheon rather than a family gathering. She smiled the way she always smiled at me, warm on the surface and carefully measured underneath. "Thomas," she said, "you have to see what we've done with the main room." She'd never called me Dad. Not once in 2 years. It was always Thomas, and I'd long since stopped expecting anything different. The inside was even more striking than the outside. Vaulted ceilings with exposed timber beams. A kitchen that looked like it had been lifted out of a cooking show. An open living area with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the water. My son appeared from around a corner and shook my hand, then pulled me into a hug. "So?" he said, stepping back and watching my face. "What do you think?" "It's stunning," I said honestly. "We listed at 1.4, he said, his voice carrying that particular pride of a man who's just won something he competed hard for. "Got it for 1.38, $1,380,000. I nodded slowly. I did what any parent does in that moment. I smiled, asked questions about the neighborhood, admired the view, ate the food his wife had arranged on platters from a catering company. I told myself it was none of my business. He was 36. He had a good income. He knew numbers better than most people alive. But that evening, as the gathering wound down and the other guests filtered out, my son asked me to stay for a few minutes. Claudia reappeared from wherever she'd been and sat beside him on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. I recognized the posture. I'd seen it in firehouses when someone was about to deliver information they'd been rehearsing. "Dad," my son said, "there's something we wanted to talk to you about." I set down my glass and waited. He walked me through it with the precision of a man who presents financial plans for a living. The mortgage was 1.1 million. Their combined income was strong, around 210,000 a year before bonuses. But Claudia had recently left her marketing director position to pursue what she called a creative business, an interior design consultancy that had not yet generated revenue. The monthly payment on the mortgage was steep. With property taxes and insurance and the cost of the renovations they were planning, the numbers were tighter than they'd anticipated. I watched my son's face while he talked. He was good at this. He knew how to frame a problem so the solution looked obvious, almost generous. "Dad," he finally said, "you've told me before that you have around 900,000 saved between your pension, your retirement accounts, and your investment portfolio. I know you live simply. I know you don't need all of it. If you could contribute 350,000 toward the principal, it would bring our payment down to something much more manageable. We'd put it in writing. We'd pay you back." The room was quiet. Through the tall windows, the water outside had gone dark. I looked at my son for a long moment. I looked at his wife. She was watching me with an expression I'd seen before on people who are very confident they're about to get what they want. And I thought about the first time I brought my son home from the hospital. I thought about the morning his mother died, the way he'd stood in the hallway outside her room in a Star Wars t-shirt, too young to understand what the doctor's face meant, but old enough to know something had broken. I thought about every single thing I had done since that morning to make sure he felt held. Tuition, rent when he was starting out, the down payment on his first car, his rehearsal dinner. Because Claudia's parents had cited a family trust issue when the wedding cost discussion came up and contributed nothing, I'd written a check for $42,000 without blinking. I said no. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. Heavier. Claudia's expression shifted. My son blinked like he'd misheard me. "What?" he said. "No," I said again. "I'm not going to do that, Dad." He started to stand up. "You make $210,000 a year," I said. "That's more money than I ever made. You chose this house knowing what it cost. That was your decision to make, and you made it. But I'm not going to fund it." My daughter-in-law leaned forward. "Thomas," she said, her voice very careful and very cool, "you have to understand something. In Claudia's family, parents support their children when they're establishing themselves. That's what families do for each other. I've been supporting my son his entire life," I said. "And we appreciate that," my son said quickly. "We do. But this is an investment. The property alone will be worth $2 million in 10 years. You'd be building wealth for yourself too." "I'm 64 years old," I said. "That money is my retirement. That's 31 years of running into burning buildings. I'm not handing it over so you can afford a house that was beyond your reach to begin with." My son's face changed. I watched something harden there. "Beyond our reach?" he said. "That's not what I started. You think we're not good enough for this neighborhood?" He was standing now. I stood up too. "That's not what I said, and you know it. You're better than good enough. You're also choosing to live at the edge of what you can afford and expecting me to close the gap. I won't do it." I drove home in the dark with both hands tight on the wheel. I kept thinking I'd feel better once the adrenaline wore off. I kept thinking the right thing would start to feel right. The letter arrived 6 weeks later. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of. 6 pages, dense with legal language. But the meaning was plain enough. My son and daughter-in-law were suing me for $700,000. The complaint alleged that I had made repeated oral promises over many years to support my son financially and to help him establish his home and family. It alleged that I had led him to rely on those promises, that I had deliberately misled him about my intentions, and that my sudden refusal had caused him severe emotional and financial damage. $700,000, twice what they'd asked for. I read it 3 times. Then I called my attorney. Her name was Patricia Holloway. She'd handled my estate documents for 15 years, helped me set up the arrangements after Carol died, sharp and plain-spoken in the way I'd always appreciated. When I read her the complaint over the phone that evening, she was quiet for almost 10 seconds. "Did you ever promise him that money?" she asked. "Never," I said. "I told him years ago that I'd saved carefully, and that I wanted to be financially secure in retirement. I told him I hoped to leave him something eventually. I never once told him I'd give him money for a house. Good. Did you put anything in writing? Texts? Emails? Anything? No. The conversation on Sunday was the first time he'd ever asked for anything like this. Another pause. I'm going to need to see everything, she said. Bank records, retirement statements, any written communication with your son over the past 5 years. This is going to be a fight, Thomas. I want to be honest with you about that. How much is this going to cost me? I asked. Could be $30,000 or more if it goes to trial, she said. Then let's get started, I told her. What followed was the worst 6 months of my life. And I say that as a man who pulled a woman out of a house fire and watched a colleague fall through a burning floor. The legal process had a particular cruelty to it, methodical and impersonal, designed to make everything intimate feel like evidence. I sat through depositions in a conference room with fluorescent lighting, while a lawyer I'd never met asked me questions designed to make me sound like a greedy old man who had watched his son drown. She had a gift for implication. Isn't it true that you've always prioritized your own financial security over your son's well-being? Isn't it true that you have the resources to help your son, but have chosen not to? Isn't it true that your son grew up without a mother, and that you've described your role as both parents? That last one stung the most, because it was true. Patricia's investigator, meanwhile, had been doing his own digging. What he found changed the shape of the case entirely. In the 14 months before they bought the house, my daughter-in-law had spent $61,000 that could be traced. A trip to Japan, a luxury SUV, 3 weeks of interior design classes in San Francisco, with accommodation at a boutique hotel. Her consultancy had generated almost no income in its first year of operation. At the same time, my son's bonus structure had changed at his firm, and his variable income had dropped significantly from projections. They hadn't bought a house they couldn't afford because of bad luck or timing. They'd bought it because they planned all along to cover the gap with someone else's money. My money. There was something else Patricia found. Something I hadn't known to look for. Claudia's parents had transferred $600,000 into a joint account with their daughter 2 weeks after the wedding. Within 8 months, that money was largely gone. Designer renovation of the condo they'd been living in. Furniture. Travel. When they bought the Lake Oswego property, Claudia's family wasn't struggling with a trust issue. They'd already seen what happened when they gave her access to a large sum of money. They had simply decided not to do it again. They weren't wealthy parents who refused to help. They were wealthy parents who'd already learned a lesson I was in the middle of learning myself. Patricia filed a motion to dismiss. The judge denied it. And we went to trial on a Tuesday morning in late October. The kind of gray Pacific Northwest morning where the sky looks like concrete and the rain can't decide whether to fall or just hover. The courtroom was small and older than I expected. Wood paneling, high windows, the particular smell of a building where serious things have happened for many years. My son and daughter-in-law sat at the plaintiff's table. My son was wearing a suit I didn't recognize. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him. He didn't look at me when I walked in. Claudia looked at me. Just once, briefly, measuring. The judge was a man in his late 60s named Judge Raymond Calloway. He had a reputation, Patricia had told me, for very little patience and very precise questions. The plaintiff's attorney made her opening statement. She was good. She painted me as a man who had dangled the promise of generational wealth in front of his son for 30 years, who had told him again and again that the savings were there, that the family would be taken care of, and who had then yanked the rug out at the moment his son needed him most. She spoke about the emotional devastation of a son being rejected by his only parent. She spoke about the financial hardship of a young couple trying to build a future. She did not mention the $61,000. Patricia stood up and told a different story. She spoke about a father who had worked dangerous physical labor for 3 decades to build a modest retirement. A father who had paid for his son's education, his first apartment, his wedding, all without being asked. A father who had said no, once, to one request, and been sued for $700,000 in response. She laid out the spending record. She laid out the timeline of the house purchase and what the financial picture actually looked like. She laid out the fact that the plaintiff had told colleagues and friends for months before ever speaking to me that his father was going to help fund the house, that he had treated an assumption as a commitment without ever actually getting one. Then came the testimony. I don't remember much of the plaintiff's attorney's cross-examination. I remember staying calm. I remember Patricia objecting several times. I remember looking at my son once from the stand and finding him staring at his own hands. Patricia's direct examination was brief and specific. "Mr. Webb," she asked, "did you at any time make a written promise to your son to fund his home purchase?" "No." "Did you at any time make a verbal promise to your son to fund his home purchase?" "Never." "Did you ever tell your son that his inheritance was guaranteed and could be used for this purpose?" "I told him I hoped to leave him something when I passed. I never told him the amount or that it was available to him now." "Why did you say no to his request?" "Because," I said, and I took a breath. "Because he's a grown man who earns a good living and made a financial decision I wasn't part of. I raised him to stand on his own feet. That's not something I just said. That's something I actually believe. And I would have been lying to him, and to myself, if I'd handed over my retirement savings to cover a choice he made without me. Is there any part of you that considered saying yes?" "I considered it all night," I said. "I turned it over 100 different ways, and every time I came back to the same answer. Helping him in this particular way wouldn't have helped him at all. It would have told him that no decision has permanent consequences if he pushes hard enough. I wasn't willing to teach him that." After my testimony, Judge Calloway asked both attorneys to approach the bench. They spoke quietly for several minutes. Then he sat back and looked out at the courtroom. He looked at my son. "Mr. Webb," he said. My son stood. "I've reviewed everything in this case," the judge said. "The financial records, the testimony, the deposition transcripts. I have a few questions for you directly, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." "Yes, Your Honor." "When you purchased a $1.38 million home, were you aware that doing so without a significant cash contribution would put you in financial difficulty?" My son hesitated. "We believed we could manage it," he said. "That's not what I asked. Were you aware it would be difficult?" A pause. "Yes, Your Honor." "Were you aware at the time of purchase that you had not yet secured a commitment from your father?" "Yes." "Did you inform the seller or your mortgage lender that your financial plan was contingent on a gift from a parent?" "No." "Why not?" "Because," my son said slowly, "I assumed it would work out." Judge Calloway removed his glasses and set them on the bench. "You assumed," he said. "You assumed a retired 64-year-old man who worked a physically demanding job for 31 years to save $900,000 would hand over a third of that savings based on a conversation you hadn't yet had." My son didn't answer. "Let me say something to you, young man," the judge said. "Your father paid for your education. He paid for your wedding. He raised you after your mother died, alone, on a firefighter's salary. And when you asked him for $350,000 from his retirement fund for a house you chose to buy, and he said no, you sued him for twice that amount. You told him in a courtroom, on the record, that he owed you." He looked down at the file in front of him, then back up. "He doesn't owe you anything. Everything he gave you over the years was a gift. It stopped being a gift the moment you filed this lawsuit and turned it into a debt. You cannot retroactively convert generosity into obligation just because the generosity stopped. That is not how family works. That is not how the law works." He put his glasses back on. "I'm dismissing this case in its entirety. I'm further ordering the plaintiffs to pay the defendant's legal fees, which I understand amount to approximately $29,000. Those fees will be paid in full within 90 days. The gavel came down. I sat still for a moment. Patricia touched my arm. "You're okay," she said quietly. I didn't feel okay. I watched my son and daughter-in-law stand from their table. Claudia gathered her bag and walked toward the door without looking back. My son stood there for a moment longer, and I thought, for just a second, that he might turn around. He didn't. I drove home alone through the gray October rain. I sat in my driveway for a while before going inside. The house was quiet. It had been quiet for a long time. That night I pulled out a box I hadn't opened in 2 years Carol's things, not the important documents. Those I kept filed and organized. The personal things, letters she'd written me early in our marriage. A prayer card from the hospital she'd kept on her nightstand. A small journal she'd kept during the last year of her illness. The one I'd never been able to read all the way through. I opened the journal to the last few pages. The handwriting was shakier near the end. I recognized that, but the words were entirely hers. Thomas, she had written. I know you'll do the right thing by our son. I know you'll be there for him in every way a father can be. But I need you to promise me something else. Don't let your love become a ladder he forgets how to climb without. I've seen it in him. That tendency to lean. He's young, and it might grow out of him. But if it doesn't, you'll have to be the one to say no. And when you do, remember that no is also love. The hardest kind. I closed the journal and held it for a long time in the quiet house. 18 months passed. I heard from my son only through attorneys. He paid the legal fees on a schedule, a little at a time, and I accepted it without comment. Patricia mentioned it once, that she'd never seen someone pay a court-ordered fee so slowly, and I told her it didn't matter as long as it was paid. I retired from the last part-time consulting work I'd been doing. I fixed things around the house. I took a woodworking class at a community college, something I'd always meant to do. I had dinner with my neighbor Ray once a week, and we talked about baseball and local politics, and almost never about anything that mattered, which was its own kind of peace. I thought about my son every day. I wondered who he was becoming. I wondered if the man I'd raised was still in there under everything that had happened. Then one morning in March, a Saturday, my doorbell rang. I opened the door, and my son was standing on the porch. He was wearing a jacket I'd never seen, something simple and a little worn. He looked older. He looked tired in a specific way that isn't really tiredness, but something that comes from the inside. He was holding a bag from a bakery down the street that I'd gone to my whole life. The one with the coffee I'd loved since before he was born. "Dad," he said. "Can I come in?" I stepped back from the door. We sat at the kitchen table. He pulled out 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of me without asking. He'd remembered exactly how I took it. I heard myself speak before I decided to. "How's the house?" I asked. He shook his head. "We sold it. Had to. The payments got too heavy once Claudia's consultancy collapsed completely. We cleared about $40,000 after everything was settled." "I'm sorry," I said. He looked up at me. He had his mother's eyes, Carol's eyes. I'd always noticed that and never quite gotten used to it. "No, you're not," he said. "But that's okay. You shouldn't be." Neither of us said anything for a moment. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Claudia and I separated 4 months ago. I moved into an apartment in Southeast. Nothing fancy. It's mine, though. I'm paying for it myself. And it's mine." I didn't say I was sorry again. He was right that I wasn't. Not entirely. "I've been talking to someone," he continued. "A therapist. I started going about 6 months ago, and I couldn't stand it at first. It felt like being taken apart one piece at a time. But somewhere around month 3, I started to understand some things about myself that I'd been looking at from the wrong side my whole life." "What kind of things?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "That I used other people's willingness to help me as a measuring stick for how much they loved me. That when you said no, it didn't feel like a financial decision to me. It felt like you finally telling me the truth about how much I mattered to you." He paused. "That was wrong. I know that now. But that's what it felt like. I said your name in a courtroom and tried to take your money, Dad. I let a lawyer call you selfish in front of a judge. I let that happen. I helped make it happen. And there is no version of the world where that was okay." I held my coffee cup and looked at my son's face. "When your mother died," I said finally, "I promised her 2 things. I promised to raise you right, and I promised not to let my love for you make you weaker. I broke the second promise too many times to count. Every time I made things easy when they should have been hard, I was breaking it. I don't know that the lawsuit was entirely your fault. Some of it was mine." His jaw tightened. "Don't do that. I'm serious. So am I. Don't take this from me. I need to own it. That's part of why I'm here." We sat with that for a while. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "My attorney reached out last month. She said Patricia Holloway had contacted her about something. A trust." I nodded slowly. He looked at me. "You knew? Patricia told me about it 2 years ago, right after the verdict. Your mother set it up before she died. I didn't know until then." He was quiet for a moment, working through the timeline. $600,000, he said. "I can access it when I turn 40, which is in 8 months." "That's right." He looked down at the table. "There are conditions." "There are. Financial responsibility," he said. "No bankruptcy. No legal action against family members." "Yes," he exhaled. "And reconciliation with you." "Yes." He was quiet again. A longer quiet this time. Outside, a bird landed on the fence and sat there for a moment before flying off. "She set all that up knowing she wasn't going to be here," he said. "Knowing you'd be raising me alone, and she still trusted that if she gave you both enough time, you'd find your way back." I had to look away from him for a moment. The window, the yard, the old maple tree. I'd planted the year he was born. "She was smarter than both of us," I said. "She always was." I heard him take a breath that was almost but not quite steady. "I don't want to talk about the money," he said. "I just want to be clear about that. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because she set a condition that required me to come back. And I realized I'd been waiting for something to make me do what I should have done on my own a year ago. So, I'm here. Not for the money. For this." He gestured between us. "This kitchen. This table. This coffee." I looked at my son. He was 38 years old and sitting at the table where he'd eaten cereal every morning of his childhood. He had his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn jaw and something else now. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. Something that looked like the beginning of the man Carol had hoped he'd become. "You can come back," I said. "Anytime you want. For coffee, for conversation, for nothing at all. That door doesn't have conditions on it." He nodded. His eyes were bright in a way he wouldn't want me to name. We sat there for 2 hours that morning. We talked about his work, which was going well under a new firm structure. We talked about a woman he'd recently started seeing, a nurse named Deanna who drove a 10-year-old pickup truck and, he said with a quiet laugh, thought a Lake Oswego mansion sounded like a nightmare to maintain. We talked about woodworking, and he seemed genuinely interested when I showed him the small cabinet I'd been building in the garage. Before he left, he stood in the doorway for a moment. "I'm going to prove it," he said. "Not for the money. I just want you to see it." "I already see it," I said. "You being here is already proof." He drove away, and I stood on the porch until his car disappeared down the street. Then I went inside and sat in the quiet for a while. Not the lonely kind of quiet, but the other kind. The kind that comes after something long and heavy has finally been set down. I went to the garage and worked on the cabinet for an hour. It was a simple design. Clean lines, solid joinery. Something built to last. My son comes over on Saturday mornings now. He brings the coffee, and I'm usually in the garage by the time he arrives. Sometimes he watches me work. Twice now he's picked up a tool and tried something himself. And he has his mother's patience for it, which I never had. Last week he asked if I'd teach him properly, if we could work on something together from scratch. I told him to pick a project. He picked a bookshelf. Something for the new apartment. Something he could keep for a long time. Something that would still be standing when he had a place worth filling. We're building it one Saturday at a time. There's a photo on my workbench now, one I put there after his first visit back. It's from his graduation, the two of us squinting into the sun, his arm around my shoulders. I look at it sometimes while I'm working, and I think about what Carol wrote in that journal, that no is also love, the hardest kind. She was right. She was usually right. I'm Thomas Webb. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years running toward things that were on fire so other people could get out safely. I thought that was the job. Turns out that was just practice. The real job was raising a son in a world that would try its best to make him soft, and being willing to say the hard thing when the hard thing needed saying, and then being still enough, afterward, to let him find his way home. He found it. We're still building.